Welcome, everyone, tonight to SCI-Arc, and for those of you watching online, welcome as well to the fourth Duel and Duet of the summer. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Duel and Duet is an occasion for us to learn more about the work of two SCI-Arc faculty and to examine maybe the differences between those projects. That's hence the duel, the nature of the duel versus that of the duet, where the projects may harmonize with one another. So we'll see how this unfolds in tonight's pairing. I think it's really a pleasure to welcome both Alexey and David to our Duel and Duet this evening, both being very esteemed colleagues of mine here at the school. And I really look forward to hearing some insights into the work that they'll be showing. So we have two very different practices, I would say. One whose practice, desk, as in the desk that we work upon as architects, or de-esk, as in David Eskenazi, provocatively reorients issues that are central to the discipline of architecture, and one, on the other hand, whose directorial work takes us into the realm of cinematic worlds and narratives. One whose projects titles Paperweight, Training Wheels, Slump Model, to name just a few, invite us to examine the incongruity between selected objects and their behaviors. Like the idea of a model that slumps is a very kind of humorous and sometimes maybe a frightening prospect within architecture. But what could that mean? Why would we consider a model that slumps? Why would we consider a wheel that trains or a paper that has weight or gravitas? These are all things I think we can consider in looking at the work of David tonight. These also are sort of the blank sheet of paper is something I think we will encounter in David's work, where when I think about that and how it's present in the work, I think of the sheet of paper as a surface where both the drawing of architecture might occur, but also the writing of architecture might unfold. And I think that is a very important aspect of the work, being an architect who's both designing and writing and theorizing actively about the work. And on the other hand, in Alexey's work, one whose films like Kowloon Forest, which I think we'll have the opportunity, I hope, to experience this evening, reveal spaces of intimacy within realities that are rendered virtual. And so how can the kind of intimate and the VR, the presence of technology and intimacy coexisting in these spaces, I think is really quite astounding. And the very different forms of architecture that we encounter in David's work and Alexey's work, both, I would argue, make significant contributions to the vibrant architectural culture that is SCI-Arc. It's something I think we've been talking a lot lately about the school, is the different, there's some maybe dichotomies or even polarizing positions that we find within the field. Where might we wish to situate ourselves, and how can we see these as all being equally valid and making a contribution that is really, I think, necessary for us to think about at this moment and as we move forward. The contributions of David and Alexey include the generosity of both as teachers. In the fall of 2018, I recall co-teaching an MArch II first-year design studio that we had called Make Believe. And Alexey generously joined us as a guest speaker. I think you may remember that, Alexey, sharing aspects of the cities, landscapes, and occupants of the virtual spaces that come to life in his work. Again, the co-presence of the technical and literally the magical, I would say, within Alexey's work was an inspiration to us all. I also once had the opportunity to interview David for a SCI-Arc Channel documentary on the exhibition, his exhibition Slump Model, which was shown in the Wedge Gallery at Woodbury University. And I recall on that occasion, David positing weakness as a form of resistance. I find this proposition to be more relevant than ever in arguing for alternative forms of agency through architecture today. It's something I continue to think a lot about, and I hope that we will find aspects of that presented in tonight's talk. David Eskenazi leads Desk, a practice based in Los Angeles with current projects in California and Mexico. Alongside the practice, David writes and teaches with publications in journals including Log, Project, Off-Ramp, and Pigeon. He has been awarded the League Prize from the Architectural League of New York, the Oberdick Fellowship at the University of Michigan, and the Lefebvre Fellowship at The Ohio State University. David was also a McDowell Fellow. Currently, David is Design Studio and Visual Studies faculty at SCI-Arc. Alexy Marfin is a film director interested in life in cities. With a professional background in visual effects, he studied at the Architectural Association in London, where he became interested in designing worlds for film. He began his filmmaking career as a visual effects artist at the Sundance Award-winning studio Factory 15 before directing his own films. Alexey's films have screened worldwide at the Busan Film Festival, Vancouver Film Festival, Brooklyn Film Festival, and many more. He has been acclaimed both in Western and Asian media, including Vice, Nowness, Ming Pao Weekly, City Magazine, RTHK, Time Out, and others. Alexey has taught and lectured internationally, including at MIT, UCLA, City University of Hong Kong, National Chiao Tung University, Tsinghua University, and the Royal College of Art. He now teaches the MS in Fiction and Entertainment at SCI-Arc together with Liam Young. So, will there be a duel or a duet? Let's see. Please welcome David and Alexey to our stage.
Thanks, Marcelin. That was awesome.
Thank you.
So I think we decided that I'll present first, and then Alexey's going to present. I think that's sort of the. Oh yeah, that's the order we're going to go in. Thank you. I think Marcelin's introduction said a lot of things that I would say, but probably more articulate. So thank you. That was really great. I'm going to present some of the work I've been doing since I started teaching at SCI-Arc, so stuff from, I guess, a couple years. A lot of the work has involved, let's say, students that have worked with me, so I just want to thank them for that. Ian Wong, Matt Hunt, Julie Riley, Jishun Wen, and Dutour Brown. They were really awesome, super students to sort of put this work forward. I'm going to start with a current project rather than ideas, and then I'm going to shift back to ideas that I wanted to talk about, and then present a few projects after that. So we'll see how that goes, because I'm just going to jump into a in-progress project, which feels kind of strange for me. But anyway, it's this ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit that I think a lot of architects are doing in Los Angeles. It's here in LA. It's in Atwater Village. This is a model that we built for it. We built it completely out of paper, without any thicknesses, out of craft paper, which is quite weak. And the idea while we were sort of trying to figure out how to design this project was to figure out how to take this weak material and maybe kind of assemble it and stiffen it in a way to sort of make a form which would become planar once again and become stiff once more. So we start to see kind of flaps that overlap each other, a lot of details that are kind of exposed as we work through it. The project, this is a little screen grab of Atwater Village. Maybe you guys know where it is, but basically it's a lot like many parts of Los Angeles in the sense that it's a kind of simple suburban area, lots of housing with little backyards. Our project sort of takes place in the backyard of a duplex, a two-story duplex with an existing garage, which is very tiny, but here, somewhere here. It's this guy right here. You can kind of see the footprint of the existing garage here. And our clients kind of came to me and said, we want to just kind of go expand horizontally, expand vertically. And we have, of course, some zoning codes that sort of allowed us to basically build this thing and sort of retain this garage door, which was this very ugly rectangle. And so we're trying to figure out how do we add something to this that would maybe produce something that would sort of negotiate this rectangle. And we came up with two solutions. One on the left where we completely ignore that rectangle. We kind of cover up the existing garage completely. And then the version on the right, which was to sort of acknowledge it as a kind of void. So it's almost demolish the garage, let's say conceptually, even though we had to keep it to kind of grandfather it in. I'm going to show you the project on the left, which is the model we just saw. We have a lot of drawings about it, but we're actually going to do the one on the right, but I'm not going to show you anything about it other than this, which is great because I like the one on the right. It's like a tree. It's very happy. The one on the left is a little bit more serious. But you know, these things sort of go in different directions. So this is, you know, things that we're just kind of working on very recently. We're trying to figure out how do you work on maybe a living situation where if the model, like you saw, was made out of paper that was trying to do a lot of work to be assembled in a way that like doesn't make sense for a shitty piece of paper to do, then maybe it would make an architecture where everything is kind of performing a lot of tasks. Everything is kind of infrastructural and formal at the same time. We start to see things, these are the different systems in the project, where maybe certain walls are kind of built inside out on the left and produce these windows. These are windows that you'll see in a lot of my projects. They're my favorite. They're like 8.5 by 11 proportions, so like everything is always back to standard letter size. And then on the right, basically different ways to sort of produce, let's say, the floor plates, which would be kind of inverted structural molds through these kind of paper systems. And then the stair would somehow be stacks and stacks of extra and extra material. In this case, we were looking at other infrastructures in the house. On the left was a proposal to think of the kitchen and the bathroom as these kind of pods that sort of float around and produce some sort of sense of intimacy. Maybe they're flexible. There's also a closet that would somehow be one of these pods that kind of be opened up and maybe kind of exposed in a slightly different way. On the right, we start to see maybe the more familiar things that make a house, like doors and windows and doorknobs, or in this case, levers, and the way that those things would sort of put together. We made a lot of drawings that look like this. There's a lot more of these than just this. These were drawings that were not really about the building, but were about prepping to make the model. And so we had like images where we're looking at the front side of what the model would be and then the back side of what the model would be. We started to plan where we would have to tape things to put the model together, try to figure out maybe where, let's say, certain kind of lighting schemes and exposed conduits might go to sort of, to see maybe the way that these things might be put together. I don't have a lot to say about this, other than we did a lot of work to try to find a glass that would kind of feel like see-through brown paper. Didn't quite find it, but that was like the idea. And so I was like, if we could get if you could get the building to kind of look like that, that'd be really great. But I don't think we really have the budget for it. We actually have to build a very cheap ADU. So that's why we're doing the second version, because this one kind of got out of hand. Anyway, and then the two sides of this tiny ADU, basically there's a perimeter wall around the property that we have a 5-foot setback from. So what do you do in that weird, awkward 5 feet between this perimeter wall and the house? You just kind of open it up, and we would imagine, let's say, domestic scenes. If you started to kind of slip around the house, you would maybe peer in and see, of course, the life of a house like this. You can start to even see the way that the windows might get detailed, that they're kind of hung maybe in between these like panels of what would eventually probably not be a piece of paper in a building. And then this is a view from a kind of second floor porch. Okay, so that was a weird way for me to start. I've never done that before. What most of my work has mostly been thinking through is maybe more related to some of the things that that Marcelin brought up, which have to do with scale models and comparison. Probably in there's maybe the word materiality and paper kind of floating in the background. I won't talk about all of these references, but the work has always been maybe about confronting some of the discussions that we often have at SCI-Arc about the changes in our working spaces with digital media and computers and computation, et cetera. And has been trying to figure out, like, in the sort of change in the way that we think through the conception and mediation of architecture, there's maybe losses and opportunities that have kind of come from that and certain biases that arise from those things. In my work, it's been mostly what is the sort of change in the conception of, let's say, scale meaning scaled drawings, scaled models, which are now maybe mediated quite differently in a digital world. What is the role of a physical model, which again, feels almost extra, like unnecessary in some ways, but is also, I like to think of physical models as like a miniature building project. Like it's like often the only building that I actually get to make as an architect, because I'm not gonna go out there, do the thing. And so in that case, there's like translations of how to sort of take the kind of conception of architecture into the material world. And then a lot of my work sort of is really about comparing things, comparing a digital thing to a physical thing, a big thing to a small thing, a kind of imagination of something to a physical sort of object. So these are various references that have kind of been important in the work. Won't go too much about them other than to say that they're always about, let's say, asking what do we know about the objects in these images just from what's in the image? How do we know how large they are? What do we know about the context surrounding them? What don't we know about those things? Why are things sort of put into dialogue with one another? Those things have always been super important to me in my own work as we think through, let's say, new conventions for architecture, which I think we're moving out of one set of conventions for architectural production and looking towards new ones, and those will emerge over time, I suppose. This is a bunch of projects I, again, won't talk too much about, but something that has been kind of floating around in experiments in previous, earlier work of the practice. I think all of this was stuff I was doing in the fellowships before I came to SCI-Arc to teach, which were basically based on two ideas. One, I guess you can kind of see up here, I'll zoom into it, this like Knopfling diagram, which was this kind of mixture of taking this Tom Sachs idea about organization and Wolflin's idea about comparing art historical models. One is a kind of linear organization by size, and the other is just two unlike things next to each other, or similar things next to each other. And to start to look at the idea of like the physical world on the right here, physical real things compared to models of themselves on the left, and what sort of measurement systems or scaled systems would sort of bring those things back together. So we see a lot of like scale figures, we see graphic rulers, measurement rods, paper sort of drooping when paper droops really large versus when it droops really big. What would a digital model of those two differences really encapsulate, and what are the sort of problems that those things put forward? All these things kind of maybe show up in this, in these kinds of diagrams. So maybe a few projects that developed some of those ideas recently begin with this image of Julie Riley when she was helping me out holding one of our two scrolls projects. So this project was to take on the form of a scroll. Basically the scroll, as we know, is kind of like maybe pre-book, but it's also a lot like the way that phones and social media work, which is the kind of endless world of information. We thought, why don't we look at it more as a form rather than an experience, and started to think through it as maybe to make a model that would go out in the world where we weren't sure exactly what the nature of the actual building would be based on what the model was doing. So this was our first early test, and we made an image like this where we weren't sure exactly, is this model 3 feet tall or 9 inches tall based on the information in this image. It's a little bit of both, meaning that the image is already kind of digital. Something about, let's say, forms or images digitally are already scaleless or already kind of not tied to size. We would be interested in making a physical model that could somehow take on that condition of the digital world. Oh, this is my cue to play videos, which I don't know how to do in an actual presentation, so they're gonna play here. So we made things like this, where we made a small model of craft paper and a large model of craft paper, and became kind of interested in the idea that really the only difference between these things is the way that materials and gravity, which are very, very physical, change the forms of these things, or obviously produce sounds. We were then interested in like the sort of its analog and digital simulations, and the way that maybe digital simulations software that's really good at sort of simulating the physics of surfaces or fabrics, et cetera, is actually really tied to size situations. So simulations that are small in this software work better than maybe simulations that are larger. Obviously, we all know digital media has always, like, let's see, a data kind of limit to it. And we started to put these things next to each other as, again, a sort of form of comparisons, the big and the small, the digital and the physical. And our hope was to make, let's say, one physical model that could somehow have all of these things in there. Have something that was digital, have something that was physical, have something of the large, something of the small, all together at once. Also, I just really love this software because it has a hand, and I think any software that like has hands and things, I think is like my favorite thing. So anyway, let me pause these for a second. Pause. We made these guys. Yeah, so we made things like this. We made even more of them. So these are some of these really large models. We started to make models of different sizes, but then always photograph them so that the picture was the same size. So that again, we would only be cued into what's the difference here was, let's say, a material world or sort of material difference that would sort of cue us into the fact that they're different sizes. We worked on structural, here we go. Structural systems. This one is 9 inches tall, but this one was 3 feet tall. This took us like a month to build it, and then it collapsed in half a second. So this is like the only picture of it that exists really. It's a lot of tape and pieces of paper, but it's these little like I-beams. Mostly because I thought, one of the things that's really size specific about buildings is structural systems. You can't just like scale those up willy-nilly. They're very, let's say, tied to how big a building is. So their digital models would be size specific rather than kind of abstract. And then similarly, we did their analogs digitally, but now we started to add things like, let's say, figures that sort of represent a size. So we have little windows. These are our tiny little windows. These are big windows. Maybe that suggests if the windows are the same size, that one building is very large, one building is very much smaller. We start to see things kind of inside and outside of each other. And so we built models like this on the left, where basically we built 2 models. This is one of them. In this model, there's a kind of 3D print on the exterior shell. On the inside is actual pieces of paper. Then there's a second model like this one, where it's sort of reversed. The exterior is just a piece of paper. The inside is a sort of 3D print from these simulations. And again, the idea with these models was to say that maybe we would look at it and say, okay, the 3D print could just scale up endlessly to the size of whatever the building might be, but the craft paper is a little bit more ambiguous. Would the building just be made of craft paper, or would it actually just look like this? Because if it was made of craft paper, it might look different, the way the paper might hang. And so these would be sort of 2, let's say, proposals for a different kind of architecture where the models are a little bit less stable in their relationship to what actually might happen at a later time, let's say. And then these are the interiors of the models. So if you take the exterior shells off, now you get the reverse. You get a 3D print inside of the paper one. You get the paper inside of the 3D print one. And then we see the windows. And so really these were proposals for a 9-foot tall building and a 45-foot tall building whose exact nature would be a little bit ambiguous as to what it might look like. This is another, maybe more realistic project that's been a little bit under construction and delayed because of the pandemic. This is a house in Mexico, in the Yucatan, right off the Gulf of Mexico. It's basically 2 houses. It's for a family who parts of the family live all over the United States and all over Mexico. It's for them to sort of come together. So there's a main house with a single bedroom on the left and a living space, and then a kind of guest house with extra bedrooms. And then a perimeter wall, and you'll see in this perimeter wall, there's these little like fold outs. This is a fireplace, an outdoor fireplace, an outdoor shower. There's a pool over here, things like this. When we were doing the project, we started to imagine, again, what are the things about forms that maybe are scaleless, and what are the things about forms that are tied to like actual sizes that can't scale up and down. And we thought of things that represent the human body. So that was like stairs and doors and windows, compared to things that are a little bit abstract, which are maybe just like, what does the shape of the building look like? And we were reminded of some of the monuments and ruins that are in the Yucatan, all the Mayan ruins, especially, for example, here Chichen Itza, but there's Uxmal and a bunch of them, which basically have 2 staircases intersecting, a human stair and I guess a stair that's out of scale to humans that are just pure architectural form. And we thought we could do that again, sort of intersect the two. And we started making drawings like this where maybe we could make an architecture where even though the two houses or the facades of the two houses would be different sizes, they could look alike, and we'd be sort of curious about what would be the one thing that would disrupt out of that exact one-to-one, and that would be the door, because the door is always tied to human size. So we would make maybe a drawing like this where things are scaled together versus a drawing like this where things are scaled to the image, and therefore the door size is a little bit different. The house is kind of organized pretty simply. This is that guest house, this is the main house, there's a pool and like a bunch of other stuff going on outside. Yeah, this is the ground floor plan. You can kind of see the bedrooms and some other stuff. We were really hoping that it would kind of be like an urban city in the middle of the jungle, a little bit like I guess these Mayan ruins, which were cities. I think we're kind of getting there. So it's under construction. It's been kind of sitting like this for 2 years. It's really beautiful. We just finally restarted this past week, so hopefully it'll be done this year. It's kind of in a moment where I hope we can keep this rather than kind of clean it all up for like a domestic inhabitation, which is probably what's going to happen. But there's something quite beautiful about, we sort of built a derelict thing. It's half a ruin, half a construction site that's just been sitting there. It's quite beautiful. So these are maybe those two figures spatially now, like on the interiors. On the left is the bedroom of the small house, the right's the living space in the large house. And we can start to see again how the windows are scaled to the photograph, and then the doors are scaled to the room or to humans. Yeah, okay. This is, Marcel mentioned this project. Ryan Martinez asked me a few years ago to do an installation at Woodbury. It was a low budget, so I thought, what's the most amount of paper I could buy for a low budget? So I bought a really big roll of paper, and we thought, why don't we build a model of the house purely out of paper? But this time, unlike the model of the ADU, we weren't so worried about maybe its structural system, and we asked maybe or sort of tried to propose an architecture that would not resist gravity, but maybe succumb to it at the size that maybe the gallery itself might be. So it kind of looks like this. And what we did was basically take the two facades of the two sizes of the house and basically connect them. But the gallery was a little bit smaller, so we built it kind of 1-to-2 instead of 1-to-1, and then ended up with something that, like I think Marcel said earlier, was a little bit about a kind of resistance to something upright, a little bit of a resistance to something heroic, let's say, and a little bit more kind of succumbing to the ground plane. We built a bunch of these studies. We were thinking a little bit about Robert Smithson's pointless vanishing point. Again, what happens to paper as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger? It sort of resists a kind of digital model, so we had to then make a kind of post-facto, post-installation model, which you see here after we sort of 3D scanned this thing and kind of figured out actually what happened. And yeah, I guess this is the plan. The gallery is a wedge gallery. It's literally a wedge in plan, which was perfect because we had our two facades that were two sizes, so it kind of like made this perfect. It was like a perfect fit. And then these are some photographs from inside of it. Oh yeah, this is my other video, this thing. So we really love the idea that you would make a giant model that was soft and then make a model of it that was rigid. So it would go from flexible to like, what's the opposite? I guess rigid, I said that. So it would kind of like jiggle. It starts to jiggle at some point. Where's the big jiggle? I don't know if this one has sound. I guess it doesn't. Where's the jiggle? Oh yeah, there's a good jiggle. Yeah, okay, there, okay, all right, we're done. One more, okay. So that was sort of like the idea of the project, was sort of, let's say, always ask like, where do models come from and what is their relationship to the thing that they're modeling? And can they have an agency of their own as new things begin to happen? As we built the 3D print for this model, we started to realize that the model, the pieces of the prints looked to us like giant buildings. And so we made this like a very last minute project, which was a proposal for a giant building that looked like a 3D print, based on this photograph that I've talked about before, this Maxime Ducamp photograph of the Egyptian monuments. The last one of these I'll show you is on my website, which is d-s.net, if you skip all the work, there's even more boring stuff, which are these devices. We decided to make maybe, I can make this full screen, I guess, something where basically we are sort of in a place where we don't have maybe means of scaling things, or maybe a working space which is to scale, and maybe we don't need it anymore. However, maybe there's times where we could sort of make maybe size legible imagery or size legible digital models. So there's a kind of section of the website where anybody can come and like download stuff that might be useful. It's kind of in progress, so these two don't quite work, but we have a scale reference, paper products, so pieces of paper that actually are arranged in a way where they would act structurally in real life, but you can just have the digital model of it. Working spaces, which right now is just like, I designed a bunch of grid paper, so you can have a digital grid paper, but basically grid paper kind of gives some sort of scale to the neutrality of a material. And then mechanisms, which are things we're working on, which are plugins for software to make everything like stuck to a specific size. The scale reference, I'll show you some of these. These are, okay, so these are the measuring sticks. So we have some measuring sticks you can download. Please do it. I'd love to see these inside of people's renderings. So we have like 1 foot measuring sticks. They come in different subdivisions. You can do 1 foot, 6 inches, 3 inches, 1 inch. We've got 3 foot measuring sticks, whatever you guys need. Like it's here, you can kind of get it. We've got 10 foot ones. They get subdivided all the way to 3 inches. Then we zoom out to metrics. So we got a 10 centimeter in case you want to measure your hand. This is the cutest one. It's my favorite. This is the 1 meter, because we can't do anything about measurement without talking about the standard meter, divided into 50 centimeters, 20, and 10. We have other scale reference that are basically recognizable things that you might use, to like make an installation or something. So we've got hot glue guns and stuff like that. If you need something size specific, here's some stuff. These don't really exist yet, but basically stickers, digital stickers you can stick on your images if you need to label something as 1,000 pixels wide, let's say. I know I hear laughter, but they're meant to be very serious. Like I think you guys can use these. And then we've got paper products. So if you need to make a stack of paper, you want to turn paper into something structural, you can download like a 36-inch stack of paper. I don't know why these are small, but here they are. If you need like a cross of crush-resistant corrugated honeycomb cardboard, this also comes in different sizes, so you can download these. If you ever need things, again, paper for some reason that's flexible, that looks structural in your digital model, we've got a roll of paper and structural frames. These are all things that we've used in our projects, so like these structural frames come from an installation I did at Ohio State, but here they are. And what's nice about these in particular is that they're basically modeled, so you just take a big flat piece of paper and fold it all up and you have something super structural and rigid, which is very useful. Okay, did it go too long already? I have one more thing. I'll fly through it, I promise. Okay, I'll go fast. Okay, so the last thing is just this bathhouse, which takes some of those structural frames. This is something that we did. I was having some conversations with some friends in the queer community at the onset of the pandemic. And maybe this was like an absurd idea. We were all at home and I was like, let's design a building where we all go together and like sweat and breathe the same air and like share water, which was like the opposite of what we should have been doing. But it was a proposal to basically use some city-owned lots around Los Angeles that are kind of unused and on main streets in LA to build maybe temporary, movable, and demountable bathhouses that might be used by different kinds of people. I won't go through all of this, but basically the thing that we got interested in, I don't know why I always say we, well, we had, I think Julie worked on this a lot and I was having these conversations with people, but we got really interested in two things about, let's say, piss and urine and bathing and things like this. One was, let's say, the conceptual idea of, looking at Duchamp, where Duchamp's fountain happens in the same city that the public urinal is kind of invented right before. And the public urinal, of course, is only for men. And of course, it was also a cruising spot for gay men in Paris at the same time. So it goes from something which is a kind of social and utilitarian infrastructure to a kind of conceptual object. We can also see its parallel architecturally, maybe in the history of, let's say, plumbing inside of walls versus plumbing maybe made a little bit more apparent in this Dohosa project, for example. And we're trying to do a project that would somehow encapsulate both of these things, a bathhouse that would both be a place for people to relax and take care of their bodies, but maybe they would also have to take care of the architecture of the building. The history of the bathhouse is like a very contested site, at least the 20th century version of it in the United States, full of pleasure and pain, social examination and racism and classicism, and places of sex and folly. It's kind of a site where strangers undress and share air, maybe pandemic things, and so therefore is also kind of a place that is up for the site of politics. And as we were doing this project, actually, the Wee Spa, which is not exactly a bathhouse, but the Wee Spa here in LA, I was getting texts on my phone from the police that they were, the Fox News had started some riot there, and the police started shooting people at the spa. So it seems like something that's still kind of a contested site. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is like this old drawing of this Hollywood spa doesn't exist anymore, but it's like such a perfect LA. Like there's always an interior world in every building in LA and you don't know what's in there. But this was like the advertisement, like an architecture of just crazy interiors and who knows what's going on the inside. Okay, I won't go through the rest of this, but basically, you get it, grids and plumbing. Okay, so the building comes in two, like a lot of my other projects. There's a sort of on and off for comparison. There's what we're calling the smaller building, the exhale building, the kind of inflating building, and then the building which was the opposite, the one that's kind of falling down. The building on the left was basically contained rooms, and the building on the right are interior landscapes. So this is the section. This smaller building you can see down here is all like bathrooms and showers and stuff. And then on the second floor is a kind of sauna. The larger building, there's a kind of interior landscape on the ground floor of bathing spaces and hot pools and showers. And then on the top floor is kind of a large swimming pool. This building basically is inverted from the other one. It's like an exoskeleton with building paper, so like Tyvek, that would have to get replaced over time. This smaller building is covered in what's called, what are those things? Water bladders, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. And then there's this thing here, which is basically the sauna sits on top of a hot water bladder, so all the hot water is stored here, and then this is all the cold water, kind of continuing these sort of dichotomies across one from the other. Okay, that's the plan. There's that interior landscape, and then all the showers and bathrooms and stuff, and then the second floor of the pool, and this kind of sauna, I don't know. Yeah, there's that pool, you can see it, and then this is, I don't know, it took a while, but we got the nice steam, we got some steam, and there's that hot water thing. But the idea with this thing was like always, how do we sort of build these contrasts? So the building on the left, in the kind of flex building, which is these water bladders, which is what this thing is, all the windows are rigid glass. The building on the right, the same windows are flexible PVC. The one building, there's giant rolls of paper at the top that you go and like pull it down. Again, you're sort of maintaining the building as much as you're maintaining yourself. The structural system is those things you can download. It's basically flat pack. You just fold it up into these triangle cross sections, so they're super strong. This building, I just really want to design a gutter, so I designed a gutter. And then, I don't know, these are the different systems in the building. There's the building paper, the different kinds of let's say pools. Oh yeah, these are these water bladders. These are kind of used by the various militaries, so I thought it'd be better for us to use them. But they're kind of movable temporal water insulation containment bags. The circulation privacy, yeah, and then these were some final images. Okay, sorry, that went a little long, sorry. You ready? You want to take over? Okay, do I hand this to you? Thank you.
Does it work? Thank you, David. And thank you, Marcelin, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I think we've almost packed the house. My presentation is a little different. I'm just going to talk about one project. I think I'm bad at multitasking. I'm just going to talk about one thing. And that's it. So this is a VR film that I did a few years ago. And actually, after the talk, I brought 2 VR headsets. If anyone wants to try it, there's also like a mini screening. So, I'll help you put it on and everything. But please stay and try it. Some people already tried it before the screening, before the talk. So, Kowloon Forest is a VR film which takes us through the private lives of 5 strangers in Hong Kong. The film is essentially a series of character portraits in VR. It's a piece about finding moments of intimacy in the density of a city. The film was made for and premiered at Osage Gallery in Hong Kong, so please look them up. They are great and doing great stuff. So this was a film, kind of commissioned by them and for them, but then it went on to live a life beyond the initial kind of purpose. Here are some photos from our premiere in Hong Kong, just to show you what a VR film premiere can look like, perhaps, if you're curious. The guy on the right is actually my roommate in Hong Kong. The guy used to rent a room from him, and part of the film is shot on his roof, so everything is like connected. And his selection of some of our press. And rather than kind of going deep into concept, I'm just going to start with the film's trailer.
我記得舊時阿婆去天台晾衫嘅時候，佢會特登着得靚啲，因為佢想嗰啲坐喺飛機裏邊嘅人望落嚟嘅時候，佢唔會失禮佢哋。間唔中，我會將自己掛喺條晾衫竹上面搖下搖下。有次我問佢點解介意人哋點睇，橫掂我哋啲底衫褲同埋舊毛巾都俾人睇晒啦。佢冇答我，佢淨係話總有一日我會大個，條晾衫竹會撐唔起我。有啲時候我會諗，其實自己係咪有啲似佢？打扮得靚啲，只不過係俾啲陌生人睇。咁冇人睇嘅時候呢？
So with Kowloon Forest, we wanted to create a film that could only exist in virtual reality, rather than sort of making a regular movie and just filming it in 360 degrees. And since it's an academic talk, there's an interesting parallel, I think, with the birth of cinema. At the start of the 20th century, a movie started to appear. One of the first things that filmmakers did was to take a theatrical play and film it kind of front on, right? And they were shot towards the stage in a single take, as if the camera was a member of the audience. So, in other words, it took a while for the visual language to catch up and for filmmakers to figure out that there can be cuts, different camera angles, non-linear passing of time, and other things which we associate with cinema today. So in other words, even though the technology was new, the thinking was still old. And with VR, I think we're still at that point of filming the play. Filmmakers haven't fully figured out the true potential of the medium. And in that sense, a bigger aim of this project was to try and research this new language of filmmaking in VR. And specifically, one of these new language ideas is proximity. We wanted to create new cinematic experiences of intimacy, feeling the presence of another human being in a visceral and tangible way that can only be done with VR. So please try the headset. afterwards. And the idea of Kowloon Forest was to use VR to pierce these characters' private bubbles and to situate the viewer somewhere extremely close to them in terms of our normal understanding of personal space and boundaries. For example, in real life, a person leans towards you, so they're only a few centimeters from your face, that'll make you feel a certain way. It could be extremely intimate, uncomfortable, personal, or something else, depending on the context. But in a regular movie, if a person comes that close to the camera, it doesn't necessarily have the same effect. It's just a close-up. So the first scene we wrote and shot was Shirley's scene here, which you can see. And her character sitting at a dressing table, taking off makeup, and we're in a tiny space between her and her reflection in the mirror, as you saw in the trailer. And we use this scene as a sort of prototype to audience test these ideas and develop the concept for the rest of the film. And there are moments when, for example, she comes very close to the viewer to peel off a false eyelash or take out a contact lens, so it's very physical. And we found also that the role of the actor changes in VR, because the viewer can now choose where to look and how to frame the shot. I mean, there is no shot, but... and we found that the role of the actor, rather, becomes less about delivering a specific line of dialogue or precisely executing a specific performance. Instead, I think, again, it's all subjective, but my belief is that acting in VR becomes a wider task of creating the entire world of that character. Perhaps it's one of the reasons why VR lends itself well to documentary filmmaking, where you're dealing with real subjects with huge backstories shaped by complex life experiences and also situated in real locations and settings. In that sense, we considered these spaces of Kowloon Forest, which are intimate and very personal, as extensions of the characters. There's some lag on my mouse click. For example, in the first scene, many of the objects that are in the room, which you can see on this slide, are actually the real belongings of Shirley, the actress of that scene, such as her childhood photos from Hong Kong or other items which have a connection to her life. Every object, whether that's physical or digital, has some kind of story or reason for being there. And this depth of design results in a space that feels very personal for that character, hiding the sensation that we are somewhere very private. And we also researched these real spaces of intimacy in other settings. For example, we dived into the world of online room tours, which is a whole portal if you're interested, to create a rule book, kind of how we construct our own spaces. For example, in this room, we don't see any bare walls. Every kind of square centimeter is used and filmed with objects. And that's both a reflection of density, but it's also a reflection of the personality of the occupier. And the idea was to create a space which was not flashy or modern, but at the same time still felt very contemporary. It's another room tour. And in the end, it all came together into this set, which is part physical and part digital. And we use the same rules, like covering as much of the bare wall as possible. And we have a backstory in all of the objects of the scene. So for example, we researched the design of Canton Pop posters to create our own one with our great production designer. And we extend the same depth of design into the whole world construction. Everything from the windowsill to the neon sign outside. And the exteriors that we see from the windows or in other shots are real Hong Kong locations, but exaggerated or somehow a bit stylized. So there's 3 types of imagery that are composited together in this film. Live action imagery in Hong Kong, live action footage on a studio set, and also computer generated imagery. So all 3 of those kind of come together to make these hopefully seamless things. And this is a still frame of the shot. Everything together, both live action and render and on location. And one thing that's interesting is the direction on set also is quite unconventional in VR, I think. When we were filming this scene, I quickly realized that we would get the best performance by starting the camera, roll everything, and then having everyone exit the room. So by leaving the actress alone during the take, we created the most comfortable setting for an action which is always performed in solitude. So actually she's the one that called cut, and then we came back into the room. we tried to do it without that, and it didn't feel natural. The next scene looks at another contemporary phenomenon, the South Korean mukbang, or live stream eating video. I'm sure you guys know this.
책장이 너무 빨리 올라가서 다 읽어드리지 못하는 점 양해를 좀 해주세요. 죄송해요. 팬가입 하신 분들 너무 고맙습니다.
I'm sure you guys have seen this. If not, then here's your introduction. Mukbang originally comes from the loneliness of Korean male office workers. I mean, now there's mukbang everywhere by all types of things, but originally it came from that, from these office workers who would watch these streams as a way of sharing mealtime with a partner. So it's kind of a thing which is like, I don't know, sexual but not sexual, romantic but not romantic. It's just eating food, right? But there's a kind of deeper context of that mealtime. So in our scene, we wanted to create the scene where a businessman is watching the mukbang stream. In Hong Kong, he's watching the streamer from Korea. And the businessman himself is also eating while watching her eat to create this sort of contemporary digital romantic dinner. And the businessman's corporate apartment would have to have a very different aesthetic to the previous flat that we saw. We wanted to design this corporate apartment which is so generic that it could be in Dubai, it could be in New York. The aesthetics of corporate supersede any local cultures. The only things that will ground it would be props specific to the character and, of course, views outside the city. So first we filmed the mukbang separately. And typically during the live stream, the performer has a chat window where they interact with their live audience, reacting to questions, comments, and getting donations. And to simulate this chat window on set, we had Insu, one of our team members here, spontaneously think of and write unprepared questions in Korean on a notebook for Angie, the actress of the scene, and then she had to reply and react to those without any preparation, which meant that our live stream truly was live. Again, it's one of the things we just figured out. We didn't plan for that. We just, on set, we just okay, how do we actually get the right performance? And we figured, it needs to be live. So even I didn't think of what those questions were. He was just, just trust him to do it. And then we write up those same questions from his notepad into the chat window overlay. So actually, if you read it, it all makes sense. It's not just, a random video feed. We design, cosmetics brand that is advertised on the billboards of the city. So this whole depth of design continues. And this is a 360 of that scene. The actor playing the businessman, Ming, he actually started, he used to be a businessman in real life before he was as an actor. He worked on Wall Street. And I think as much as possible, we try to have this authenticity in our casting in order to help construct that wider world of the actor that I talked about at the start. The next scene is about two Filipino maids, domestic helpers, who are playing cards on their Sunday off. In Hong Kong, many people have domestic helpers or maids who help raise children, clean, cook, and so on, mainly from Philippines or from Indonesia. And once a week, usually on Sundays, the maids have a day off. But because they live with their employers, they can't really rest at home, because that's their workplace. So they go out into the city, onto parks, overpass streets, other public areas to socialize, play cards, listen to music, whatever, and just have a break. And in that sense, this scene is very powerful because the private space is actually outside. In this scene, like with the businessman, the casting was crucial. One of the actresses, Sarah, she's the daughter of a Filipino domestic helper from Hong Kong, and she helped us develop these kind of small details in the scene. And I think this kind of personal background really helps to develop the wider context, not just for VR, but in general, and kind of ensures that the story is bigger than just kind of what's in my head. And digitally, we added many more neon signs to the streetscape in the scene, which we filmed in Hong Kong. And a lot of these are neon signs which used to be there decades ago, or used to be in other parts of Hong Kong, but have since been taken down reality. So by preserving them digitally, we sort of create an alternative present where history had played out differently, or, and it creates feelings of nostalgia and longing for a city which no longer exists in an otherwise totally contemporary context, people using phones and whatever. It's not a period piece at all. And of course, physically, they also just help create the feeling of enclosure that we talked about, especially because this intimate space is now outside. And we designed the overpass in 3D because we didn't want to film there, it would be too chaotic. You know, and all the details that come from it. And this is the 360, just kind of still frame. The videos are laggy, I don't know why. Yeah. And the final scene that I'll talk about, what am I doing for time? Yeah, 5 minutes left. And the final scene I'll talk about takes place in Chungking Mansions, which is this infamous building in Hong Kong that's home to many immigrant communities in the city. And these are real photos from the context. And it's also where I stayed when I first came to Hong Kong, I think eight years ago, while making a different movie. So I guess I should also say that all the scenes are somehow inspired by my own experience in Hong Kong over the years somehow. And this scene is about an Indian internet cafe owner who at night works as an online Jyotish, which is sort of Indian astrologer. This is a real banner for Jyotish as a reference, so that kind of astrology. And in this scene, again, the casting was super crucial. Raghuram, who's in this scene, he's a spiritual teacher from South India, so he knew this context firsthand. He brought his own clothes and props, and he really just directed the whole performance of this scene. The surrounding internet cafe is a mixture of digital imagery and real footage. And we deliberately densify and compress everything in the scene to make it feel very tight and intimate in VR. You missed it, mate. You're late. You came for the last slide. Slide 54 out of 56. And I just want to finish on this short behind-the-scenes video. Thank you.